They said justice was blind, but that night I saw it turn its face away from me. Betrayal tore through my heart, and love became the cruelest lie I'd ever known. I remember the night everything fell apart as if it were burned into my bones. The sky was dark, swollen with thunderclouds, and the sound of rain hammered against my windshield like the beating of my heart. My name is Clara Monroe, and for 53 years I believed in loyalty, in the quiet beauty of love that survives through storms. But on that night, love showed me its ugliest face. The phone call came just after 10. I was folding laundry when the phone rang, and I almost didn't answer. The voice on the other end trembled, heavy with hesitation. "Mrs. Monroe, you should come to the hospital." A pause, then a sigh that sent a chill down my spine. "It's about Michael, my husband, my partner of 30 years, the man who once promised to love me until death." The drive there was a blur of fear and denial. Rain poured so hard the wipers couldn't keep up, but I didn't slow down. I kept hearing his name echo in my head like a broken prayer. Michael, Michael, Michael. I prayed I was overreacting, that maybe it was something small, something we could laugh about later. But when I walked into that hospital room, I realized some wounds can't be healed. He wasn't alone. A young woman sat beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her beauty hit me like a cruel joke from heaven. She couldn't have been older than 28, maybe 30 at most. Her name, I would later learn, was Lena. And in that moment, I knew. I didn't need anyone to tell me. The silence between them was enough. Michael looked up, his face pale and guilt-stricken. "Clara," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of shame. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe." The world tilted beneath me. The woman's eyes met mine, wide, terrified, full of regret. "I didn't know he was married," she stammered. "He told me you were separated." Separated. That one word sliced through me sharper than any blade. My hands trembled. My heart pounded in my ears. I turned and walked out before I could say something I'd regret. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's survival. Outside, the rain was merciless. I stood under it, numb, watching water blur the lights of the parking lot. It felt like the whole world was crying with me. I wanted to scream, to destroy something, to make him feel the way I did. But instead, I just stood there, drenched, letting the rain hide my tears. When I got home, the house felt different, hollow, heavy, haunted by memories that no longer belonged to me. The wedding photos on the wall mocked me with their smiles. The couch where we watched movies felt like a crime scene. Every corner whispered lies. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and whispered into the night. When did love become a lie? The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't eat. I didn't speak. The hours passed like ghosts drifting through the house. People texted. Friends called. But I couldn't bring myself to answer. Because how do you explain to someone that the person you built your whole world around has quietly dismantled it while smiling at you? A week later, Michael came home. He stood in the doorway like a stranger, his eyes red, his voice barely holding steady. "It was a mistake, Clara," he said. "I swear it didn't mean anything." I looked at him, this man I'd trusted, this man who once held my heart like it was something sacred, and I felt nothing but emptiness. "You didn't make a mistake, Michael," I said softly. "You made a choice." He looked broken, his shoulders shaking. "Please, Clara, I can't lose you." I shook my head. "You already did." And then I walked away, leaving behind 3 decades of love and lies. I moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked the river, but it was quiet. And quiet was what I needed. Every night I'd sit there with a cup of tea and listen to the city breathe. Sometimes I'd think of him, sometimes I'd think of her. But mostly I thought about the woman I used to be and wondered if she'd ever come back. Weeks passed. Then came the letters. They were handwritten, delivered without return addresses, each one filled with guilt and longing. I threw them away at first, but curiosity has a way of finding cracks in even the strongest walls. One night I opened one. His handwriting was shaky, his words uneven. "If forgiveness is a bridge," he wrote, "then I'm standing at the edge, waiting for you to build it with me." I wanted to hate him for writing that. I wanted to burn the letter and everything it stood for. But instead I folded it gently and placed it in a drawer. Because deep down, I knew forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. One Sunday, I wandered into a church. Not because I was looking for God, but because I was looking for peace. The air smelled like candle wax and old wood. The choir was singing softly, and for the first time in months, my heart didn't feel like a stone. I whispered into the silence, "If you're real, show me how to start over." And maybe he heard me. Because that night I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Evelyn, an older woman with kind eyes and a presence that felt like sunlight after a storm. She sat beside me without saying a word, then smiled and whispered, "Sometimes the breaking is what sets us free." I didn't understand it then, but those words would stay with me, echoing long after she left. Because maybe that's what life is, learning to find freedom in the things that once broke us. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something. The story wasn't over. Maybe it never really is. Maybe the pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal, they're not endings at all. Maybe they're just the beginning of becoming who we were always meant to be. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds outside my window, something I hadn't noticed in months. Their songs used to annoy me when I was still with Michael, but that morning, they felt like a promise. Soft, fragile, almost holy. I made a cup of coffee and sat on my little balcony, staring at the river that shimmered like a path to somewhere better. The sunlight felt foreign on my skin, like it was testing me, wondering if I was ready to feel warmth again. Later that day, I went back to the church. I didn't know why, but something inside me needed to. Maybe I was looking for peace, or maybe I just didn't want to be alone with my thoughts anymore. The same woman was there, Evelyn. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes kind, deep, knowing. "Back again," she said softly, like she'd been expecting me. I nodded. "I don't know what I'm doing here," I admitted, feeling embarrassed. "I'm not religious," she chuckled gently. "You don't have to be. Sometimes we just come here to remember how to listen." We sat in silence for a while, just watching the candles flicker. There was something in that quiet that felt healing. Like the world finally stopped shouting long enough for me to breathe. Evelyn turned to me and said, "You look like a woman who's been carrying too much for too long." Her words cracked something open in me. I tried to smile, but instead I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "I thought I knew what my life was," I whispered. "I thought love meant safety, but now I don't even know who I am without him." Evelyn reached for my hand and held it gently. "Then maybe it's time to find out," she said. "Sometimes when everything falls apart, it's just life clearing space for something new." Those words settled in my chest like a seed. Over the next few weeks, I found myself going back to the church more often. Not to pray exactly, but to sit. To breathe, to listen. Evelyn was always there, always calm, always patient. She told me she'd lost her husband too, years ago to cancer. "Grief changes shape," she said one day, her eyes distant. "At first it's like drowning. Then one day you realize you've been swimming." I didn't tell her about the betrayal right away. I wasn't ready, but she never asked for details. She just showed up, with tea, with stories, with silence when I needed it most. Slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. One afternoon, she invited me to her house for dinner. It was small but filled with warmth, old photographs, books stacked everywhere, and the smell of baked bread drifting from the oven. "This place feels alive," I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in months. Evelyn laughed. "That's because I talk to it," she said. "Every morning I thank my walls for keeping me warm and my table for holding my meals. Gratitude keeps the heart from rotting." That night over soup and bread, she asked me gently, "Do you still love him?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I stared at my bowl, unable to answer. Did I still love Michael? The truth was I didn't know. The pain was too tangled with the love. I finally said, I think I love the man I thought he was. Not the one he became. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's fair. But love, real love, doesn't die when it's betrayed. It just changes form. Sometimes it becomes compassion. Sometimes it becomes wisdom. And sometimes it just becomes silence. Her words haunted me that night. I lay in bed thinking about them. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about letting him back into my life. Maybe it was about letting myself go free. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk by the river. The air was cold but clean. Children laughed nearby. A couple walked hand in hand, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness watching them. I just felt acceptance. I stopped by a small cafe, one Michael and I used to visit. The barista recognized me and smiled politely. Haven't seen you in a while, he said. Yeah, I replied softly. It's been a long season. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I saw a familiar figure through the window. It was Michael. He looked older somehow, more tired. He noticed me and hesitated, then walked in. My heart started racing. Clara, he said quietly, do you mind if I sit? I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk out, but instead I nodded. He sat across from me, his hands trembling. I've been trying to find the words, he said, but there aren't any that make this right. I stared at him, waiting. He swallowed hard. Lena left, he said. She found out I'd lied about more than just you. She said she couldn't love a man who didn't love himself. There it was, the karma, the consequence, the truth I'd been waiting to hear. But instead of satisfaction, I felt only sadness. I'm sorry, I said softly. Not for her leaving, but for the man you've become. He blinked, surprised. You don't hate me? I sighed. Hating you would mean you still have that kind of power over me. And you don't. He looked down, tears forming in his eyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're right, I said. You don't. But I'm going to forgive you anyway. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, full of everything we'd lost. Then I stood up, placed my hand on his shoulder, and said, Goodbye, Michael. As I walked out, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of it. That evening, I went to the church again. Evelyn was lighting candles at the altar. When she saw me, she smiled. You did something hard today, didn't you? I nodded. I let go. Her eyes glistened with quiet pride. Good, because only empty hands can receive what's next. We sat together in the soft light, the air filled with the faint smell of wax and old hymns. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt clean. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I realized forgiveness doesn't always come as a moment. It comes as a series of breaths. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe again. That night, I sat by the window, watching the storm roll in over the hills, lightning splitting the sky in sharp, angry flashes. The world outside looked like my heart felt, chaotic, trembling, ready to burst. The house was silent except for the clock ticking on the mantel, each tick like a reminder of time slipping away, of promises broken, of love that had once burned bright, now fading into ash. I thought about Michael again, about how different everything might have been if he had just stayed. His words still echoed in my mind. You're too much, Emily. Too emotional, too needy, too... everything. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been too much for him, too hopeful, too believing in forever. I wrapped my arms around myself, the loneliness pressing in on every side. The storm outside grew louder, rain pounding the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, eyes red, lips trembling, a woman who had given too much of herself and didn't know how to get it back. Then the phone buzzed. My heart jumped. For a second, I thought it might be him, reaching out after months of silence. But it wasn't. It was my daughter, Anna. Mom, are you okay? Her text read. I hesitated before replying. I didn't want her to worry, not when she was finally happy in her own life. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I typed back. But I wasn't fine. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds. The storm had passed, and sunlight spilled across the floor like mercy. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small flicker of peace. Maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten me. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The world smelled clean, washed, alive. I watched the trees glisten in the morning light and whispered, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm still here." The words felt heavy but true. I wasn't giving up, not yet. Later that afternoon, I went into town for groceries. The streets were quiet, the air crisp. As I walked past the cafe where Michael and I used to sit, I felt that familiar ache rise again. Memories came flooding back. The laughter, the shared glances, the way his hand always reached for mine under the table. It hurt so deeply that I had to stop for a moment and catch my breath. That's when a voice behind me said, "Emily?" I turned around. It was Pastor Mark from the small church at the edge of town. He looked surprised to see me. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I've been taking time." "You should come back," he said. "We miss you." I wanted to tell him that I couldn't, that sitting in that pew while pretending I wasn't falling apart was too much. But all I managed was, "Maybe soon." He smiled and nodded, but I could see in his eyes he knew. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why some people seem to carry heavier burdens than others. I thought about all the prayers I'd whispered through tears, all the nights I'd begged God for answers that never seemed to come. And then, around midnight, something inside me broke. I got out of bed, fell to my knees, and sobbed. "Why, God? Why did you let him go? Why did you let my heart shatter?" The words came like a flood, raw and desperate. I didn't care who heard. The rain had stopped, but inside me, it poured. I stayed there for what felt like hours, until my voice was gone and my heart felt emptied. Then, in the stillness, I heard something. Soft, quiet, almost like a whisper in my soul. "Because I never left." I froze. The room was silent, but something deep inside me shifted. The loneliness didn't feel as heavy anymore. The pain didn't sting quite as much. For the first time in months, I felt seen. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes but a strange lightness in my chest. I couldn't explain it. There was no miracle, no grand revelation, just a small, steady peace sitting quietly inside me. I made breakfast and turned on the radio. The first song that played was Amazing Grace. I smiled through tears. Maybe that was God's way of reminding me that grace still existed, that even when everything falls apart, His love remains. Later that week, I found myself walking back into church. My hands trembled as I opened the doors, but the warmth that hit me as I stepped inside nearly brought me to my knees. People turned and smiled, real, genuine smiles that didn't ask questions or demand explanations. Pastor Mark greeted me with open arms. "Welcome home," he said. Those two words undid me. I sat in the back pew, tears streaming down my face, as the choir sang about redemption and mercy. And for the first time, I didn't feel unworthy. I felt loved. After the service, an older woman named Grace came up to me. She looked at me with kind eyes and said, "You've got the look of someone God isn't done with yet." I laughed through my tears. "I hope you're right," I said. She squeezed my hand. "Oh, I know I am." Her confidence felt like a balm to my soul. Maybe God really wasn't done with me. Maybe my story wasn't over. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The world looked softer somehow. I picked up my journal and began to write. Not about loss or heartbreak this time, but about hope. About how the light always finds a way through the cracks. About how faith isn't about having all the answers, but trusting that even in the silence, God is still speaking. I wrote until my hand cramped, tears falling onto the pages. each one a testament that I was still alive, still fighting, still believing. When I finally closed the journal, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The past still hurt, yes, but it no longer owned me. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." And deep inside, I felt him whisper back, "I never will." That night, as I drifted to sleep, I realized something powerful. Sometimes God doesn't fix the storm. Sometimes He simply calms your heart in the middle of it, and that, I thought, was the beginning of healing. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun had even stretched across the sky. There was a strange stillness in the air, a kind of sacred quiet that made everything feel suspended in time. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the first light break over the trees. The world was waking up, but inside me, something still felt fragile, like glass that had cracked but hadn't yet shattered. I thought about the whisper I'd heard that night, the words that had kept echoing in my heart. Because I never left. Those 5 words had changed something deep within me. They were both a comfort and a challenge. If God had never left, then maybe I needed to stop running. I spent the morning cleaning out old boxes that had been sitting untouched for years. Photos, letters, keepsakes, all little fragments of my life before everything fell apart. I found a picture of Michael and me from the early days, his arm around me, both of us laughing like the world was ours. The sight of it made my heart twist. I almost put it away again, but something in me whispered, "Face it." So I sat there on the floor, holding the picture, letting every memory wash over me. The trips, the laughter, the nights we danced in the kitchen, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. And then the fights, the distance, the slow unraveling. It wasn't one big moment that ended us. It was 1,000 tiny ones we never paid attention to. As I sifted through the box, I found a letter I'd started to write to him months ago, but never finished. The paper was wrinkled, the ink smudged from tears that had fallen as I wrote. My handwriting trembled across the page. "Michael, I don't know where things went wrong, but I still can't stop thinking about you. I keep hoping you'll call, hoping you'll remember what we had. But maybe this is God's way of showing me that I need to let go. I don't want to hate you. I just want peace." Reading it now, I felt the same ache I had that night. But there was something else, too. A quiet strength that hadn't been there before. I didn't need to send the letter anymore. I didn't need closure from him to find healing within myself. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the box. But this time, I wasn't burying it. I was honoring it. It was a piece of my story, and I was finally ready to stop running from it. I whispered a prayer under my breath. "God, help me forgive him, and help me forgive myself." The words were soft, but they carried weight. Forgiveness didn't come like lightning. It came like dawn, slow and steady, a light that gently pushed away the darkness. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the river. The air was crisp, and leaves crunched beneath my boots. The sound of the water was soothing, constant, eternal. I sat on a bench and watched the sunlight dance across the ripples. For the first time, I noticed how peaceful it was to just be. Not to think, not to analyze, not to replay every mistake, but simply to exist in the moment. A group of children ran past me, laughing as they chased each other, their joy contagious. I smiled without even realizing it. Life, I thought, has a way of continuing even when your heart feels paused. An elderly man walked by and tipped his hat. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "It really is." He smiled kindly and said something that stayed with me. "You know, every sunrise means God's giving us another chance to start again." I nodded, blinking back tears. Another chance. Maybe that was all I needed, to believe that even after everything, I could still begin again. When I got home, I felt a nudge to do something I hadn't done in years. I sat down at the piano. My fingers trembled as they touched the keys. The last time I'd played was the night before Michael left. Music had always been our thing, but as I pressed the first note, something shifted inside me. The sound was soft, hesitant, but alive. I played an old hymn, "It Is Well With My Soul." My voice cracked as I sang, but I didn't stop. By the time I reached the final line, tears were streaming down my face. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was healing. The phone rang just as I finished playing. It was Anna again. "Mom, I'm coming home this weekend," she said. "I just miss you." My heart warmed. "I miss you too, sweetheart," I said. When I hung up, I looked around my quiet house and smiled. For the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt ready. Ready for laughter, for love, for life again. That night, I sat outside on the porch, the air cool against my skin. Fireflies danced in the yard, tiny sparks of light flickering against the darkness. I thought about all the nights I had begged God to change my circumstances, to fix what was broken, to bring back what I had lost. But maybe he had been working on something deeper all along, changing me. Maybe his greatest miracle wasn't in what he restored, but in what he renewed. I took a deep breath and whispered, "I'm still here, Lord, and I'm not giving up." In that moment, a calm washed over me, one that felt different from anything before. It wasn't the fragile peace of denial, it was the sturdy peace of surrender. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. Before going inside, I glanced up at the sky. The stars were bright, scattered across the heavens like promises waiting to be fulfilled. I felt small beneath them, but not forgotten. "You're still writing my story," I whispered, "and I trust you with the next chapter." That night, I opened my journal again. The first words I wrote were simple but powerful. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. I underlined it twice. The woman who had fallen apart months ago was slowly coming back to life. Not as who she was, but as someone new, someone stronger, someone softer. As I closed my eyes to sleep, one thought echoed in my heart like a prayer. Maybe the pain wasn't meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to teach me how deeply I could love and how much I could survive. And for the first time since Michael left, I truly believed that everything broken could still be made beautiful in time. The weekend came faster than I expected, and the house that had been silent for months was suddenly alive with the sound of my daughter's laughter. Anna filled the rooms with warmth, her voice, her energy, her gentle presence reminding me of the days when life felt simple. She looked so much like her father, but her kindness, her empathy, that was all her own. "Mom," she said as we sat together on the porch swing, "you look different." I smiled softly. "Different good or different bad?" She tilted her head, studying me the way only a daughter can. "Different peaceful," she said. "Like you've finally exhaled after holding your breath for a long time." Her words hit me right in the chest. She was right. For so long, I had been surviving instead of living. But lately, I'd felt something stirring, a quiet, stubborn hope that refused to die. We talked for hours that night. About her job, her new apartment, her plans for the future. But when she asked about her father, the air shifted. "Have you heard from him?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "No, and I don't think I will." She hesitated before saying, "Would you talk to him if he reached out?" I wanted to answer right away, but the truth caught in my throat. "I don't know," I finally said. "I want to say yes, but some doors once closed aren't meant to be reopened." Anna nodded, though I could see the sadness in her eyes. She missed him too, even if she didn't say it. The next morning, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, I heard the doorbell ring. My hands froze. Nobody ever came by unannounced. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. And there he was, Michael, standing on my porch like a ghost from another life. My heart stopped. He looked older, more tired. The confidence that once defined him had been replaced with something softer, something broken. "Hi, Emily," he said quietly. His voice trembled, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to scream, to demand why he was here after all this time. But instead, all I could say was, "What are you doing here?" He looked down, his hands fidgeting with the brim of his cap. "I was in town. I didn't know if I should come by, but I needed to see you. My chest tightened. After all this time, you just needed to see me? He nodded, eyes full of regret. I've made so many mistakes, he said. I left because I thought I'd find something better, something easier. But all I found was emptiness. I didn't know what to say. Every part of me was torn between anger and pity, between the pain of the past and the pull of old love. You don't get to just walk back in, I said finally, my voice trembling. You don't get to show up like nothing happened. He took a step closer, his voice low. I know, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know I'm sorry. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Sorry. 2 small syllables carrying the weight of years of silence. I turned away, unable to look at him. Do you know what it was like? I asked, my voice cracking. To wake up every morning and wonder what I did wrong? To replay every word, every fight, trying to figure out where I lost you? He closed his eyes. I know, and I hate myself for it. I let out a shaky breath. The anger that had lived in me for so long began to unravel, thread by thread, not because he deserved it, but because I was tired of carrying it. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said quietly, but I don't hate you anymore. He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. That's more than I deserve. For a moment, we stood there in silence, years of pain sitting between us like a third presence. Then Anna stepped outside, her eyes widening when she saw him. Dad, she whispered. Michael froze, then smiled weakly. Hey, sweetheart. The tears came then, hers, his, and mine. She walked up to him and hugged him without hesitation. I watched them, my heart aching and healing all at once. We spent the afternoon together, awkward at first, but slowly thawing. We talked about simple things, the weather, old memories, the people we used to know. It was strange, like trying to have a conversation with a ghost who suddenly decided to live again. But beneath it all, there was something genuine, a quiet remorse, a longing for peace. When the sun began to set, he stood up to leave. Thank you for letting me in, he said softly. I didn't expect you to, but I needed to tell you I'm proud of you. You've become stronger than I ever was. His words caught me off guard. You don't get to take credit for that, I said with a small smile. That strength came from the breaking. He smiled sadly. Maybe sometimes we have to lose everything to find what matters. I nodded. Maybe. After he left, Anna and I sat together in silence. The sky was painted in shades of amber and rose, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt relief. The closure I'd begged God for didn't come the way I expected. It came through surrender, through facing what I'd run from. Mom, Anna said quietly, are you okay? I nodded, wiping a tear from my cheek. Yeah, I said softly. I think I finally am. That night I wrote again in my journal, sometimes healing doesn't mean getting back what you lost. Sometimes it means realizing you're whole even without it. As I closed the journal, I looked toward the heavens and whispered, Thank you, Lord, for bringing peace, even through the storm. Before going to bed, I walked out to the porch one last time. The stars were brighter than I had ever seen them, each one shining like a promise. And in the quiet, I heard it again, the same whisper that had started this journey. I never left. This time I smiled. I know, I whispered back. And I'm not leaving you either. As I stood there, the night breeze wrapped around me like a soft embrace, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I felt redeemed. The woman who had once been lost in sorrow now stood in peace. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this. God had turned my ashes into something beautiful, and I was finally ready to live again. The morning after Michael left, the house was filled with silence again, but it wasn't the same heavy, suffocating silence that used to linger after he walked away. This time, it was peaceful. A calm after the storm. The kind that lets you finally breathe again. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the golden light pour across the yard. The sky looked clear, as if even heaven had exhaled. But inside, I still felt the echo of yesterday's emotions. Shock, sadness, and something I hadn't felt in years. Release. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a one-time decision. It was a process, a journey that demanded courage. I had told Michael that I didn't hate him anymore, and that was true. But saying the words and living them were two very different things. My heart still carried bruises, invisible but deep. Every memory of him still had the power to stir something within me, both tender and painful. As I took another sip of coffee, I whispered, "Lord, teach me how to forgive fully, not just with my lips, but with my soul." That day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time, volunteer at the church. Pastor Mark was surprised to see me walk through the doors again, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Emily," he said, "it's good to see you back." I smiled. "I figured it's time to do something that isn't just about me." He nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. We're organizing care packages for the shelter downtown. You can start there." As I worked alongside other women from the church, sorting canned goods and folding clothes, something unexpected happened. I felt useful again, needed. There was a sense of purpose in helping others, in stepping outside my pain and seeing that I wasn't the only one who had been broken. One woman, Martha, told me how her husband had passed away 3 years earlier, and how she'd spent months questioning God. Another, Denise, shared how she'd rebuilt her life after losing everything in a fire. Their stories reminded me that suffering is universal, but so is healing. At the end of the day, Pastor Mark gathered us in a circle to pray. "Forgiveness," he said, "isn't about forgetting what was done to you. It's about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment. You don't forgive to let them off the hook. You forgive so you can move forward." His words struck me like lightning. For so long, I had believed forgiveness meant erasing the past, pretending it didn't hurt. But now I understood. It wasn't about erasure, it was about release. That night, I couldn't sleep. The words "move forward" kept echoing in my mind. I got up, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and sat on the porch, staring at the moon. The air was cool and still, the crickets singing in the distance. I thought about Michael, about the man he used to be, about the man he had become. For the first time, I felt compassion instead of pain. He had been lost too. Maybe not in the same way I was, but still lost. And just like me, he had needed grace. I whispered a quiet prayer into the night. "God, I forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because you've forgiven me. Help me let go of the rest." The moment the words left my lips, something inside me loosened. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden rush of light or sound, but I felt lighter, freer, like a weight I didn't know I was still carrying had finally been lifted. Tears fell down my cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of freedom. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. The house looked different, brighter somehow, though nothing had changed. Maybe it was just me. I opened the windows and let the sunlight in, filling every corner of my home with warmth. I turned on some old gospel music, the kind Michael used to tease me for loving, and began to cook breakfast. There was joy in the small things again, the sound of bacon sizzling, the smell of coffee brewing, the way the morning light danced across the counter. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. It was Michael's. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside, he had written a single page, his words raw and trembling. "Emily, I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am. I've spent years trying to fill the emptiness I created when I walked away from you and from God. But nothing worked. I see now that love isn't about running when things get hard. It's about staying, even when it hurts. I hope you find peace even if it's without me. You always were the light in my darkness. Michael." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the page. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my Bible between the pages of Psalms. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of redemption. It wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about closing them properly. That Sunday, Pastor Mark's sermon was about second chances. "Sometimes God lets things fall apart," he said, "so he can rebuild them his way. Our job is to trust his hands, even when we don't understand his plan. I felt those words in my bones. Maybe that was exactly what God had been doing all along, rebuilding me piece by piece, teaching me that peace doesn't come from fixing everything outside of you, but from surrendering what's inside. After church, Martha invited me for coffee. We sat by the window of the little cafe downtown, sunlight streaming through the glass. She smiled at me and said, "You've got that look again." I laughed. "What look?" "The one of someone who finally stopped fighting and started trusting." I nodded slowly, stirring my cup. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it." That evening, I took a walk by the river again. The same place where I'd once sat in pain now felt like sacred ground. The water shimmered under the setting sun, and I realized how much I'd changed. The bitterness was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was peace, a quiet, steady peace that didn't depend on circumstances. I picked up a small stone from the riverbank and threw it into the water, watching the ripples spread outward. "That's me," I whispered, finally letting go. And as the ripples faded into stillness, I felt it. Complete forgiveness, both given and received. When I returned home, I lit a candle and sat by the window, writing in my journal. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It changes how you carry it. I closed the journal and placed it beside me. The night outside was calm, the stars glimmering above like gentle reminders that grace was still at work. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and smiled through the tears. I wasn't who I used to be. I wasn't the woman defined by heartbreak or regret. I was the woman who survived, who forgave, who believed again. And that, I thought, was the real miracle. The rain had stopped by morning, but the world still felt heavy. Gray clouds hung low over the valley, pressing down on the hills like a reminder that peace was still far away. Inside the small church on the corner of Cedar and Pine, Emma sat in the last pew, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't been here in months. The air smelled like old wood and candle wax, and the silence was so deep she could hear her heartbeat echo against the stained glass. Her mother used to sit in this very spot every Sunday, humming along with the choir, eyes closed, face glowing with quiet faith. Emma tried to remember that sound now, the soft rhythm of her mother's voice, but all she could hear was the last argument they had before she died. The guilt had followed her everywhere. She bowed her head. "God, I don't even know what to say anymore," she whispered. "I've made so many mistakes. I've pushed away everyone who cared. I don't deserve forgiveness." The door creaked open behind her. Footsteps, slow, hesitant. Then a voice she hadn't heard in months. "You think that's true?" Emma turned around, eyes wide. It was Noah. His clothes were soaked from the rain, his eyes red and his hair messy as if he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. "What are you doing here?" she breathed. "I could ask you the same," he said softly, walking closer. "I came to talk to God. But I guess he wanted me to find you first." Emma tried to look away, but her tears betrayed her. After everything that happened, after what I said, he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the one he got the night they fought, and he crashed his bike leaving her house. "Emma," he said, voice trembling, "we both said things we didn't mean. I blamed you for walking away, but truth is, I never gave you a reason to stay. I was drowning in my pride, and I pulled you down with me." Emma closed her eyes, her breath shaking. "You don't know how much that night haunts me." "I do," he said, his voice breaking. "Because it haunts me too." They stood there, the silence between them no longer empty, but heavy with all the words they never said. Outside, sunlight began to pierce through the clouds, coloring the church windows with streaks of blue and gold. Emma took a deep breath. "Noah, I thought if I ran far enough I could forget everything. But the farther I went, the more I realized. I wasn't just running from you. I was running from myself. From God." He nodded slowly. "And did you find what you were looking for?" "No," she said softly. "But I think I'm ready to stop running now." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something for you," he said quietly. "It's nothing fancy, just something I needed to say." Emma hesitated, then took it. The handwriting was rough, a little smudged from rain. It read, "I forgive you, Emma, not because it's easy, but because I need to be free. You once told me love wasn't about perfection. It was about staying when everything hurts. I didn't stay, but maybe now we can both start again, not as the people we were, but as the people we're becoming." Her hands trembled as she read. Tears fell, but this time, they weren't just from pain. They were from release. "Noah," she whispered, voice cracking. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," he said, smiling faintly. "Just be here." The choir began to sing softly in the distance, an old hymn their mothers used to love. Emma listened, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years: peace. She looked up at the stained glass, the figure of Jesus, arms open wide, light falling through his heart. And in that moment, she realized that maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a road, long and uneven, but full of mercy waiting at every turn. After the service, they walked outside together. The air smelled fresh, like the earth had just been washed clean. Children played near the steps, their laughter echoing across the street. Emma stopped and watched them, a small smile forming. "You ever think about how everything starts over after a storm?" she asked. "Yeah," Noah said, glancing at her. "It's like the world remembers how to breathe again." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Maybe we can too." He looked at her for a long time as if memorizing her face. "Do you want to take a walk? There's something I want to show you." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." They walked toward the meadow where they used to meet years ago, the place where they first said they loved each other. The grass was taller now, wildflowers growing between the stones. The air was thick with the scent of rain and sun. "I came here a few weeks ago," Noah said. "I thought if I stood here long enough, maybe I'd hear your voice again." Emma smiled sadly. "And did you?" He shook his head. "No, but I heard mine. And I realized I'd been silent for too long." They stopped at the edge of the field. The horizon was glowing orange, the sun slipping behind the hills. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the warmth on her skin. "Do you ever think God gives us moments like this?" she whispered. "Not to erase the past, but to remind us that love still wins?" Noah looked at her, his eyes full of quiet awe. "Yeah, I think he does." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emma laughed, softly, freely. The sound mingled with the wind, carrying pieces of her old pain away. As they stood there side by side, the world felt new again. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. And deep down, Emma knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would still hold trials, old wounds might reopen, and faith might waver again. But something inside her had changed. She was no longer running from her past. She was walking toward her healing, and somewhere above the clouds, the light broke through completely, warm, fierce, unrelenting. A promise, a new dawn, the start of grace. The following morning, the sun rose quietly over the valley, painting the sky with soft strokes of gold and pink. The town was still, except for the sound of birds stirring in the trees and the faint hum of life beginning again. Emma woke early, her heart strangely light yet uneasy, as if the peace she'd felt the night before was too fragile to last. She sat at the edge of her bed, staring at her hands, the ones that had trembled in prayer just hours ago. The memory of Noah's words still echoed in her chest. "We can start again, not as the people we were, but as the people we're becoming." It sounded so simple when he said it, but starting again meant facing the ghosts she'd buried for years. And one of those ghosts still lived in the same town, her father. She hadn't spoken to him since her mother's funeral. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. Every attempt ended in silence, or worse, in anger. He had blamed her for leaving home, for chasing dreams that pulled her away from family. She had blamed him for never understanding her grief, for shutting down when she needed him most. Two broken hearts that couldn't speak the same language. Now, sitting in that small room with the morning light spilling through the window, she realized that forgiveness couldn't stop with Noah. It had to reach deeper, to the roots of her pain. She stood up, washed her face, and dressed quietly. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. There were faint lines around her eyes, marks of all the nights she'd spent crying alone. But there was something new too, softness, a quiet strength. By the time she reached her father's house, her hands were shaking again. The paint on the fence had peeled away since she'd last been here. The roses her mother once tended had grown wild, curling over the gate like hands reaching out for something lost. She took a deep breath, pushed the gate open, and walked up the path. The front door creaked when she knocked. For a moment there was nothing. Then the sound of slow, heavy footsteps. When the door opened, her father stood there, older than she remembered. His hair had turned completely gray, his shoulders slightly hunched. But his eyes, those tired blue eyes, still held that same mix of pride and sadness. "Emma," he said softly, as if he didn't believe she was real. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. "Can I come in?" He hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The house smelled like dust and old memories. Her mother's piano still stood in the corner, though a thin layer of dust coated the keys. Emma ran her fingers across it, tracing the pattern of neglect. Her father cleared his throat. "It's been a long time." "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "Too long." He sat down at the kitchen table and she joined him. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she said, "I went to church yesterday." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Haven't heard you say that in a while." "I know," she said quietly. "I needed to find something again. Or maybe someone." Her father nodded slowly, his fingers tapping against his coffee mug. "And did you?" "I think I did," she said. "I found peace. At least a little of it." He looked away, staring at the window. "Your mother would have liked that." The mention of her mother's name made her throat tighten. "Dad, I need to tell you something." He turned to her, wary but open. "I spent years blaming you," she said, her voice trembling. "For how you shut down after she died. For not talking to me. For making me feel like I was the reason everything fell apart." His face tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I was angry," she continued. "So angry that I left, thinking distance would fix it. But it didn't. It just made me lonelier. And when I lost everything else, my faith, my love, myself, I realized it wasn't about blame anymore. It was about pain. Both of us were just hurting in different ways." He looked down at his hands, then whispered, "You're right. I didn't know how to grieve. Every time I saw you, I saw her. And it broke me. I thought keeping distance would protect me, but all it did was build walls between us." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. "I don't want those walls anymore." Her father's eyes glistened too. He reached across the table, his rough, calloused hand covering hers. "Neither do I." For the first time in years, they sat together. No shouting, no silence, just truth. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it began to heal them. Later that afternoon, Emma walked back through town, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The air smelled of cinnamon and coffee from the bakery, and she found herself smiling at strangers. She stopped by the small bookstore on Main Street where she used to work as a teenager. The owner, Mrs. Hayes, looked up in surprise when Emma walked in. "Well, I'll be," Mrs. Hayes said, laughing softly, "if it isn't Emma Carter. I thought you'd forgotten this old place." "Never," Emma said with a grin. "It still smells like home." Mrs. Hayes tilted her head. "You look different, sweetheart. Softer somehow. Like someone who's finally stopped fighting the world." Emma laughed, a little embarrassed. "Maybe I finally have." When she left the store, she noticed Noah standing by the old bridge, hands in his pockets, watching the water move below. She walked over quietly, her steps echoing against the wood. He turned and smiled when he saw her. "Hey, thought I might find you here." She stood beside him, watching the sunlight dance on the river. I went to see my dad today. Noah's eyebrows lifted. That's brave. It was hard, she admitted. But good. I think we both said things we should have said years ago. I'm proud of you, he said. She looked at him, eyes soft. I don't think I could have done it without last night. Without you reminding me that grace doesn't stop at forgiveness. It keeps going. Noah smiled, his voice gentle. Grace always goes further than we think. They stood there for a while, the sound of rushing water beneath them, the town moving slowly behind. For the first time in forever, Emma didn't feel trapped by her past. She felt anchored in something real. As the sun dipped low, Noah turned to her. You ever think about leaving again? She shook her head. No, I think I've finally found where I belong. He nodded, a quiet joy in his eyes. Then maybe the storm really is over. Emma looked at the horizon, the sky burning orange and gold. Maybe, she said softly. But even if it comes back, I know where to run now. Not away, from God, from love, but toward them. And as the evening light shimmered across the river, Emma felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Freedom. Not from her past, but from fear itself. For the first time, she was no longer a woman trying to escape her story. She was the one learning to write it anew, one forgiven step at a time. That night, rain began to fall again. Soft at first, then harder, like the sky itself was remembering every tear ever shed. Emma sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. Each one seemed to carry a memory, her mother's laughter, Noah's voice, her father's trembling hands when he finally said, I'm sorry. The storm outside didn't scare her this time, but something about it felt familiar, almost prophetic. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Noah. Can you come by the church? I need to show you something. Her heart skipped. She grabbed her coat, slipped on her boots, and stepped into the rain. The air was cold, the streets shimmering under streetlights, puddles reflecting the trembling glow of neon signs. By the time she reached the church, her clothes were soaked through, but she didn't care. Something in her chest urged her forward, as if God himself was calling her closer. The church doors creaked open, and inside, the light was dim. Noah stood near the altar, holding a small box in his hands. His eyes were serious, almost sorrowful. Emma, he said softly, thank you for coming. What's going on? She asked, brushing wet hair from her face. He took a deep breath. I got a letter today. From my brother. Her heart tightened. She remembered the stories Noah had told her. About his brother, David, the one who had disappeared years ago after stealing money from their family business. It had been Noah's deepest wound, the betrayal that had shaped his faith and broken his trust. What did he say? She whispered. Noah's fingers trembled as he opened the box and pulled out a letter. He's in the hospital. Liver failure. The doctors don't think he has much time left. Emma froze, the sound of rain filling the silence. Noah? He swallowed hard. He wants to see me. He says he's sorry for everything, that he wants to make things right before it's too late. That's good, isn't it? She said carefully. Noah shook his head, his voice rough. It's been 12 years, Emma. 12 years since he left me with nothing but anger and debt. He didn't just steal money, he stole trust, our parents' peace, our family's name. I told myself I forgave him, but maybe I didn't, because now all I feel is fear. Fear of seeing him again, fear that I'll say something I can't take back. Emma stepped closer, her eyes tender. Maybe that fear isn't a sign of weakness. Maybe it's proof your heart still cares. Noah looked at her, his eyes searching. Do you think forgiveness is really that easy? She smiled sadly. No, it's never easy, but it's always right. He turned away, gripping the letter tightly. He wants me to go tomorrow morning, but I don't know if I can. Emma reached out, placing her hand gently over his. Then I'll go with you, his eyes softened. You don't have to. I know, she said. But you were there when I faced my past. Let me be there when you face yours. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky pale and clear. They drove together in silence, the hum of the road filling the space between them. Miles rolled by, and with each one, Noah's shoulders seemed to grow heavier. When they finally reached the hospital, the sterile white walls and faint scent of antiseptic hit Emma's senses like a cold wave. They walked down the corridor, guided by a nurse who stopped at a small room. "He's awake," she said gently. Inside, David lay frail and pale, his face hollow, his skin tinged with gray. When he looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "Noah," he rasped. "You came." Noah stood frozen at the door, his breath uneven. For a moment he looked like a man caught between rage and mercy. Then he took a step forward. "I didn't come to make things easy," Noah said quietly. "But I came." David's lips quivered. "That's more than I deserve." Silence fell heavy between them. Emma stood back, her heart pounding as she watched two broken brothers stare at each other after 12 long years. Finally, Noah sat down beside the bed. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Why now? After everything?" David's eyes filled again. "Because dying has a way of stripping the lies off your soul. I thought I was escaping guilt, but it followed me everywhere. I ruined our family, Noah. I stole from you, from Mom and Dad, from everyone who ever loved me. I thought if I stayed away, I'd save you the pain of seeing what I became. But that was another lie." Noah's jaw tightened. "You did save me pain. You just replaced it with anger." David coughed, his hand trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know I never stopped loving you." The words pierced through the air, raw and trembling. Noah stared at his brother, his breath shaky, tears threatening to break through. "You hurt me more than anyone ever could," he whispered. "But I think I still love you too." David's tears slipped down his cheeks. "Then I can die in peace." Noah shook his head, clutching his brother's hand. "No, not yet. Not until you know what grace feels like." Emma turned away, unable to hold back her tears. She could feel God's presence in that small hospital room, not in thunder or miracles, but in the quiet surrender of two souls finally laying down their pain. When David took his last breath that evening, Noah didn't cry out. He just held his brother's hand, eyes closed, whispering a prayer that trembled between grief and gratitude. Later, outside the hospital, Noah leaned against the car, silent. The wind carried the scent of rain and fresh earth. Emma stood beside him, her voice soft. "You did it. You let him go." He nodded, his eyes red but calm. "It doesn't feel like forgiveness. It feels like breaking." "Sometimes breaking is the first step toward being whole," she said gently. He turned to her, his gaze steady. "You were right, Emma. Grace goes further than we think. But I never knew it could go this far," she smiled faintly. "Neither did I, until I met you." They stood there under the darkening sky, the hum of the world moving around them, two hearts bruised but alive. For the first time, Noah realized forgiveness wasn't something he gave. It was something that set him free. And as he looked at Emma, he knew the journey wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. The morning after the funeral, the world seemed quieter than usual, as if even the wind was holding its breath. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and pine, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang softly. Emma stood beside Noah under the wide oak tree near the cemetery, their hands clasped together. The sky was pale gold, the kind of color that feels like mercy. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The fresh mound of earth before them said enough. On it rested a small wooden cross with a simple inscription: "David Walker, beloved brother, finally home." Noah exhaled slowly, his eyes tracing the words. "It's strange," he whispered. "I thought forgiveness would feel like release, like something leaving me, but it feels like something being given instead, like a piece of my heart finally came back." Emma looked at him, her voice soft. "That's what real grace does. It doesn't just heal the one you forgive, it heals you too." He turned to her, his eyes full of quiet gratitude. "If you hadn't pushed me to go, I don't think I ever would have." She smiled faintly. You didn't need me to push you, Noah. You just needed someone to remind you that love doesn't end with pain. It begins again because of it. They stayed there until the sun climbed higher, turning the grass into a sea of light. When they finally walked back to the car, the silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. That afternoon, they went back to the small church where everything had started, the place where Emma had first found her way back to God, and where Noah had found the courage to face his past. The old wooden doors creaked open, and light streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the floor. Emma sat in the front pew while Noah stood by the altar, his hands resting on the edge. "It's strange," he said quietly. "For so long, I thought being strong meant pretending the pain wasn't there. But maybe real strength is being honest enough to admit when it's breaking you." Emma nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "Yes. We all try to hide our scars, but maybe that's where grace shines the brightest, through what's broken." He smiled softly, his eyes warm. "You sound like you should be the one preaching," she laughed through her tears. "No, I just finally learned to listen." Noah sat beside her, and for a while neither of them said a word. The light shifted slowly, filling the church with warmth. Then Emma whispered, almost to herself, "You know, I used to think God abandoned me when life fell apart. But now I think he was just waiting for me to stop running long enough to turn around." Noah nodded. "Sometimes he doesn't calm the storm. Sometimes he calms us in the middle of it." They both smiled because they knew it was true. That evening they invited Emma's father to dinner. The table was simple: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a little too much gravy. But it felt like the first meal of a new chapter. Laughter came easily, and for the first time in years, Emma felt like home wasn't a place. It was the people sitting around that table. As the night drew on, Noah stood up to leave. Emma walked him to the porch, the stars glittering above them like scattered hope. "You think you'll stay here for a while?" she asked. He looked out toward the dark horizon. "I don't know. Maybe. There's something about this town. It feels like God isn't done here yet." She smiled, her voice soft. "Maybe he's not done with either of us." He turned to her, his eyes gentle. "Emma, you taught me something I'll never forget." "What's that?" "That love, real love, doesn't wait until people deserve it. It shows up when they don't. It keeps showing up until they can finally see it." Her heart swelled, tears rising again. "That's what grace really is, isn't it?" He nodded, smiling. "Exactly that." They stood there under the stars, the air cool and still. And for the first time, neither of them felt lost. They didn't need to chase happiness anymore. They were already standing in it. Weeks passed, and Emma began volunteering at the church, helping young women rebuild their lives after loss and addiction. Each story reminded her of her own journey, the fear, the guilt, the endless longing for a second chance. She would sit with them, listen, and tell them the truth that had changed her life. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. God can use even your worst chapters to write something beautiful. One night, after a long day of counseling, she sat outside the church steps, watching the sunset fade into purple dusk. Her father joined her carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You've changed," he said quietly. She smiled. "I think I just finally stopped fighting what was meant to heal me." He nodded, his voice full of pride. "Your mother would have loved seeing you like this." Emma looked up at the sky, her heart swelling with peace. Maybe she does. They sat together in silence, sipping coffee as the first stars appeared. The night felt full. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything finally made sense. Later that week, Emma recorded a short message for her online community. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes glowed with conviction. "If you're listening to this," she began, "and you feel like your life is too far gone, too shattered, or too late, please hear me. It's not. The worst thing you've ever done doesn't define you. The pain you're carrying isn't proof that God abandoned you. It's proof that He's still calling you. He doesn't waste brokenness. He transforms it. I've seen it in my life, in the lives of others, and I promise you, Grace is real. It's waiting for you to reach out. She paused, her voice trembling with emotion. Don't give up. Don't walk away from the story God is still writing for you. And if this message touched your heart, I invite you to stay. Subscribe, share your story, and walk with us through this journey of healing and hope. You're not alone. You're never alone. Her words lingered in the quiet room long after she stopped speaking. When she clicked upload, she felt something shift deep inside her, like a circle finally closing, like peace finding its home. Outside, the night was still. But somewhere beyond the clouds, the first light of dawn was already waiting, because that's what grace does. It doesn't erase the darkness. It just promises that the light will always return, and sometimes that promise is all we need to keep believing, keep forgiving, and keep loving. One more day at a time.